The views expressed on this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the views of our employers.
Evolution of Evil.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep. That's when they would be strangled.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
'Cause I want to know who I'm looking at.
Evil is not spurned. Evil is thought of as a spirit that needs help.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Evolution of Evil.
Hello and welcome to the True Crime Podcast, Evolution of Evil, the show where we relive some of the more awful and horrific crimes while also diving into the human psyche that makes these crimes possible. Please remember to subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And remember to follow the show on Twitter at Evolution of EVI2, as well as our personal accounts at Justin Yent and at TJ Stevens 91. TJ, we've talked about how we want to make this interactive. Tell us how we're incorporating our listeners' input into our shows.
Yeah, so at the end of my Bell Gunnis episode, which got great feedback, and I'm glad that I got to teach some of you about Bell Gunnis who are unaware of her. But I said I was going to start doing polls on what my next crime should be. Now, this will probably be the last serial killer I'm going to do for a while. I'm probably just going to go to more just not basic crimes. That'd be boring, but, not serial killers. And because if we did a serial killer every episode, we'd be done before the year was over. So, but it'll be bigger crimes people know about. I've already got a couple in my head for the next poll. And I put a poll out for this one. And I got to be honest with you, with the people that I put on there, I was surprised who got the W, because it was John Wayne Gacy, who's another one just up the road from me over in Illinois. Eileen Wuornos, who were the other two? Kenneth Bianchi and Buono was one, which got no votes. And I'm definitely I'm going to do all four of these at some point for sure. But I think the reason why Buono and Bianchi aren't better known is because they were in LA at the same time as the Night Stalker. So I'm not sure as many people know about that. Who was my other one? I'm kind of glad they didn't win because I can't remember. Oh, Gary Ridgway. That was the other one. Green River Killer. And they're all interesting topics. I was surprised Eileen Wuornos got the win here, and certainly it's an interesting case. And this episode is going to be longer than the previous two have been. There's a lot more information here. I was telling you before we started, this is going to be a heavy show. It's going to be rough.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear kind of what you've kind of found out. And to me, I wasn't surprised. So we've mentioned her in the past two episodes. Mm-hmm. So I think just kind of reminding our audience, we kind of compared her to Bell Gunnis in the first episode. We said, hey, can you imagine if her and Danny Rollins kind of passed each other, in Florida or along 75 back in the 90s. So to me, I think it was just topic of mind. So it didn't surprise me at all, but I'm anxious to learn more about her through your research this week.
Yeah, and I was telling you too that obviously I was aware of her before I did the show. That's why she was a topic. And again, she's certainly an interesting case, but I only knew before this, of the serial killer part of it. I knew nothing about her before that. And yikes. So there's not, I'm just going to warn you now, not going to be as many jokes on this one. I poured myself a drink to do this show because, again, it's just if you're at work, wait till you get home to listen to this. And I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. There's a lot of disturbing things in this show that might upset you. I can tell you just, and there are going to be certain parts of the show where it's going to seem like I'm excusing what she did, and I'm not. And we'll get into that as the show goes on. But I can just tell you, going through her upbringing as a parent, it boggles the mind, and it shattered my heart to hear what she had to go through. But we'll get through all those things. Again, it's just a warning. It's going to be rough.
So it surprised me, and you have another podcast. You actually have two, other than ours, which we will remind the listeners of a little bit later. But it surprised me you'd never seen the movie Monster with Charlotte Theron, and that was huge back in the I think early 2000s. I believe
2003 was when it was released.
And so I know you're a little bit younger than me, and maybe not have caught it, but you would watch the documentary. So I'm anxious to see like what you've learned from the documentary, the research that you have, and did you watch the movie Monster since kind of doing some of the research?
So here's the thing. I was going to watch it while I was researching the show. And once I got into it, for one, I got really into the story, so I wouldn't have paid attention to it anyway. But also, there had been so much evil in my room that I'm not sure I could have handled. So I am going to watch it. This might seem weird, but maybe we can do this on the show as a watch along. But people may not want to after hearing this. Again, this is heavy. So I think with all, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I think we've delayed it enough to get into the deep talk of Eileen Wuornos. So let's get into it. Let's hear about it.
Yeah. So again, after my first episode was Belle Gunness. She was America's first serial killer. At least I'm fairly certain of it. Again, allegedly she died in 1912, I think. And that's why nobody really knows about her. And when Eileen came to the news forefront, she got arrested in 1990 or early 91. And, this was after Bundy. This was after Gacy. This was after the Night Stalker. This was after Bianchi and Buono. And we're just, stone's throw away from Jeffrey Dahmer's going to show up before too much longer. I mean, I think he was already killing by now. He just hadn't been caught yet. So I think that's why Eileen's more known. But again, even me, as an avid true crime guy, I didn't know the backstory. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that. And then we'll get into what she did from there. So Eileen was born on February 29th, 1956. She is a leap year baby, which again, that I had a feeling when that was the first thing I found out. I'm like, this is probably not going to be good. She was born in Rochester, Michigan. Again, the Midwest, we're the champions of serial killers. To her mother, Diane, and her father, Dale. Now, Diane, when they got married, she was 14 years old. And Dale was 18. And I would think even in 1954, that was probably not that cool. I remember when I first started writing this sentence, I started to say, well, it's 1954, so I guess it wasn't that weird. It was. It wasn't that long ago. After being married on June 3rd, 1954, Diane would give birth to their first child, a boy named Keith, on March 14th, 1955. However, the newlyweds with a developing family wasn't meant to be, as Diane and Dale would file for divorce after less than 2 years of marriage and just 2 months before she gave birth to their daughter, Eileen. She was 16 years old when she gave birth to Eileen. So she's 16, divorced with 2 kids. And that is not even scratching the surface. Eileen never met her father because, on top of the fact that her parents were divorced before she was born, her father was in prison when Eileen was born, and Dale was then diagnosed with schizophrenia. There's commonly some confusion about schizophrenia and mistaking it as multiple personality disorder, and they are not the same thing. Schizophrenia is defined as a mental disorder characterized by significant alterations in perception, thoughts, mood, and behavior, not split personality disorder. Usually, generally speaking, split personality disorder is comes to be because as a child, the child will go through such horrendous trauma that the body almost makes a second personality to deal with it. I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I've watched shows just on that, and it's certainly to me, it's fascinating how the brain works. It just, essentially makes another person to deal with trauma. It's crazy. By the way, her father Dale was in prison for kidnapping and raping a 7-year-old girl, in which he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but the coward committed suicide on January 30th, 1969. So we're already seeing some troubling elements of the parental unit, as well as her father being a clinical schizophrenic and having violent tendencies. So we talked in the first episode about sort of the alleged violent criminal serial killer triangle. And although family problems aren't necessarily on it, it's head trauma, severe head trauma, bedwetting, and I can't remember the third one. But I mean, the home situation, not always the case, but a lot of the time it is a very big factor, especially under circumstances like these.
Well, if you remember, Danny Rawlings kind of had the same type of upbringing, right? Young mother, mental illness with the father. So it just seems to have somewhat of a pattern from where we were going last week with Danny Rawling. But interested to hear further about her childhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's before we get back into it, it's like when they're in these situations, it's almost like their moral compass gets lost on where to point to, and then as time goes on, it just gets corroded in place, and it doesn't move anymore, and it's unfortunate. Now let's discuss Eileen's childhood. In January of 1960, Eileen was abandoned by her mother and left with her alcoholic grandparents. Eileen was not even 4 years old here. The grandparents officially adopted Eileen and Keith on March 18th, 1960. By the age of 11 in 1967, Eileen was engaging in sexual activities in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, and food. Needless to say, it doesn't appear that this new home situation is helping her already injured child psyche at all. Went right from the frying pan to the fire here. Add to this, Eileen has said that her grandfather had sexually assaulted and beaten her during childhood, as well as she was performing sexual acts on her brother. Now, this is going to sound weird, but I wanted to find out more about that because I don't know if it was forced or willing. And this, again, when you take an interest in stuff like this, you have to ask that question. And it's, again, we're just getting started, folks, so hang in there. When her grandfather did beat her, he would make Eileen strip naked first. I wish we were out of the bad news, but because of the sensitive type of material we cover, this is not going to be the case. In 1970, she was impregnated by one of her grandparents' friends at the age of 14 after being raped. So now, if you remember, her mother was 14 when she got married and gave birth to Keith. So eerily similar. Now, again, this is an entirely different circumstance. I'm not trying to equivocate the two, but it's an eerily similar path here. She gave birth to a boy at a home for unwed mothers on March 23rd, 1971, at which time the child was put up for adoption. The best decision she ever made, by the way. A few months later, her grandmother died from liver failure, and Eileen dropped out of school. Then her grandfather threw her out of the house, where she became a sex worker to support herself while living in the woods. So she went from having a schizophrenic father and a young mother to having neither, and then having alcoholic grandparents, of which the grandfather beat her naked. She was performing sex acts on her brother and impregnated by one of her grandfather's friends. And now she's living in the woods.
Just makes you sick. I mean, it completely just goes, there's no steady life for her. And, we go back to that nurture versus nature thought process. So, it's awful.
Yeah, unfortunately, Eileen never had a chance here.
No.
And again, I will reemphasize, as a parent, hearing things like this, I can't fathom treating children this way. I don't understand. When we cover horrendous crimes, if everyone involved is an adult, it seems more palatable for no other reason than usually adults have the mental strength and resolve to be able to rebound somewhat. I mean, when something happens like this happens to an adult, even, there's always a scar, but they have much better coping mechanisms. Children don't have a chance because they don't have the social skills to defend themselves, and the scars are deeper, and sometimes they never heal. Hearing these things about Eileen, I often put myself in the shoes of, if this were my daughter. And when you hear this childhood story specifically, and if I knew that she was being tormented like this, so let's say I'm her deadbeat dad, who's complete garbage. I'm not trying to defend this guy in any way, but say I was him and did dumb shit and then got thrown in prison for it, and then I found out this was happening, I'd lose my mind. Now, granted, he has no morals either, so I mean, who knows? Maybe he probably never even knew. Well, actually, no, by here he was dead. Excuse me. Most normally, emotionally mature people would feel that way. Unfortunately, when it comes to violent criminals, for the most part, they're surrounded by emotionless, careless ghouls themselves. So not only is their childhood completely screwed up, but they never develop, again, the moral compass to know which way they should go when it comes to right or wrong. And again, we're just getting warmed up here. On May 27th, 1974, the now 18-year-old Eileen is arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado for a DUI, disorderly conduct, and the firing of a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. To add to these charges, she failed to appear in court. And instead, she hitchhiked to Florida, and this is where she met 69-year-old Louis Gratz Fell. Gratz was the president of a yacht club, and mind you that Eileen is 20 years old now when this Gratz situation happens. I say that because they became married within weeks, which is always a good idea. Weirdly enough, the marriage between strangers didn't pan out well, as Eileen was constantly getting into bar fights and was even arrested for assault. Fell ended up filing a restraining order on Warno shortly after they were married because she hit him with his own cane. On July 14th, 1976, she went back to Michigan and was arrested for assault and disturbing the peace after throwing a billiards ball at a bartender inside Bernie's Club in Mansalona. 3 days later, her older brother Keith died of esophageal cancer, and Eileen received $10,000 from his life insurance policy. Wuornos and her Florida husband annulled their marriage on July 21st after only 9 weeks of marriage. After spending $105 in a drunk driving fine, she would spend her brother's insurance on a new car, which she quickly totaled. Another aspect of this troubled lifestyle that often gets overlooked is not only the tendency to hurt others, but the tendency to hurt themselves. Between the ages of 14 and 22, she attempted suicide 6 times before shooting herself in the stomach in 1978 at the age of 22. on May 21st, 1981. As Eileen was now back in Florida, she was arrested in Edgewater for armed robbery of a convenience store. The score, 2 packs of smokes and $35. She served 13 months in prison from May 4th, 1982 until June 30th, 1983. Less than 1 year later, in May of 84, she was arrested for forging checks. And in 1985, she was arrested for stealing a revolver handgun and ammo in Pasco County.
So the funny thing about that is that's where I live right now is Pasco County. It's just crazy, though, how she continues to self-sabotage herself.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, she keeps stumbling, and maybe that's not even the right word, because it's not like she's spiraling out of control. She already is out of control. But she just keeps doing these things. And we're going to get into this a little bit more here soon. We're going to talk about this again. So she keeps doing these things, and there's all the signs are there. But again, it's the 80s. And here's the key part to remember, because it is the 80s. She's getting arrested in different places. If you've ever watched any crime documentary from the 80s, police forces didn't like talking to each other. And they didn't share information because it's their turf. That came up a lot in the Night Stalker case. And this is time for me to wake up. This is probably the choice. I mean, this is probably what's happening here. Because, I mean, with, again, beating an old man with a cane, bar fight in Michigan, threw a billiards ball at a guy, grand theft auto, larceny, all these things. If she would have done 2 of these things in one county, this story probably goes entirely different. Now, it probably ends up the same. It just would have taken longer. But she could have been arrested several times. And again, all the signs are here. And because of the times, she just was allowed to propagate. The crime started to become more frequent, more brazen, and more dangerous. On January 4th, 1986, she was arrested in Miami for grand theft auto, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice after providing a fake ID. The name on the false ID was that of her aunt. When the police were checking her car, they found a .38 revolver and ammunition. Actually, I shouldn't say it was her car because it was stolen after all. On June 2nd of 1986, police in Volusia County arrested Wuornos for questioning after a male had told him that Eileen had held him at gunpoint in his car and demanded $200. Under the seat of this car was alleged to have happened in. Police found extra ammunition and a .22.
TJ, kind of just to go to your point about, the national system that they have, back in 1967 is when it first started. Mm-hmm. They only had 15 law enforcement agencies and 1 FBI field office. It wasn't until 1999 that it kind of spread national. So, I mean, think about it. From 1967 to 1999, they were able to get away with a lot more because of the fact that they weren't able to trace what you were talking about. So she did get away with a lot more because of the fact is, hey, I can hop and move around the country and not really get away with it. So just an interesting fact.
Yeah. And I'm guessing here if she's not homeless, she's close.
Yeah.
And it came up. The most glaring example of this, and I'm not necessarily blaming police. It's just the way it worked back then. The most glaring case of this to me is Ted Bundy, because he started, allegedly he started in Washington. Then now some people are saying he actually started in Oregon before, the big stuff, the things he was known for happened or was admitted to or whatever. We'll just say Washington. So he started in Washington, went to Colorado, and same thing. I want to say he did one in Idaho, but I could be wrong. But Colorado for sure. Arrested, escaped the courthouse after jumping out of the second story window because they let him use the courthouse library because he was defending himself. And then he escapes to Florida, where he goes to the sorority house and kills 6, I believe, and then gets arrested. And the cops had no idea who they had. Now, granted, it's across the country, but it's also 1978. The information wasn't there. They weren't talking to each other, and it's. I mean, by then it actually caught national press by then. But he grew his hair out a little bit and changed his appearance. And I think he had a mustache when he was arrested. So they didn't know it was him for several weeks because he didn't talk, and the car was stolen. So it's, and then again you get Bundy. Now, granted, he was arrested fairly quick and never let go again after Florida, but you this pops up because 2 different states, Florida and Michigan, and she's popping around different counties. So, but what I really want to focus on here, from the period between 1981 and 1986, we're starting to see this trend of more violence, and more telling is the crimes are escalating. Even though she started with the armed robbery at the convenience store, that is often done for survival, especially when you hear the take was 2 packs of cigarettes at $35. She wasn't looking to retire. That's done it's a survival thing. It's not necessarily a satisfaction of violence or anything like that, usually. I'm not saying this wasn't the case for her. I don't know. But generally. But then because then she goes down to forged checks, which again, survival thing. But now we go to stolen gun and ammo. Could be viewed as survival. I'm not. That's the first one. I'm like, that doesn't seem like survival instinct. That seems like something else. And then Grand Theft Auto, resisting arrest, and now holding a man at gunpoint inside of a car. It's quite clear she's becoming more unpredictable, ultra violent, and then the sad part to this escalation curve in the upward direction, there usually is no top. It just continues until they're caught, and that's where we're headed. A few months after the motorist at gunpoint incident, she was married. The now 30-year-old Warnos married 24-year-old Tyra Moore at a renowned gay bar in Daytona Beach called the Zodiac, which I thought was a little ironic when I read that part. They moved in together, and Warnos was the one making the supporting income, and she was earning her money being a sex worker. On July 4th, 1987, both Warnos and Moore were arrested for what was that supposed to be? On July 4th, 1987, both Warnos and Moore were arrested for another incident that included them assaulting someone with a beer bottle. In March of 1988, Warnos filed an assault claim against a Daytona bus driver after she says he pushed her off the bus. And again, that's one of those things I could not find details on. Because that seemed weird to me. Just out of nowhere, she's filing an assault claim because she got pushed off a bus. That was not a normal thing. Weird shit happened. And I really wanted to know what. The spiral would continue. And then in November of 1989, it's going to rise even higher. And here, because of what she's doing and how it ends, this is the peak. But again, it never really... It only doesn't go higher because, again, of how this ends. So on November 30th, 1989, Richard Charles Mallory, who owned an electronics store in Clearwater, he's found dead. And before you think I'm going to do a heartfelt recap of this well-liked man, that is not going to happen, because it turns out Mallory was no angel himself, because he was priorly arrested in Maryland and convicted for attempted rape. I don't know if priorly is a word, but I just said it, and we're going to run with it. On this fateful day, November 30th of 89, he came across Eileen, and according to Warnos, Mallory beat her, raped her, and sodomized her during a paid sexual encounter gone wrong. They would find the body of Mallory on December 13th in a wooded and secluded area where he had been shot several times. Again, Warnos claims this was in self-defense. Now, the notes for this section on this case is over, but this is going to come up again later because this whole case is important for what Eileen divulges to a documentarian later. So keep Mallory in the back of your head, not in a real, because again, kind of fuck that guy, but I mean, just remember the name. June 1st, 1990, we head to Citrus County just off of Route 19, where police have found the naked and lifeless body that would be identified as David Spears. The 47-year-old construction worker was declared missing on May 19th, 1990 in Winter Garden. He had been shot 6 times with a .22 caliber pistol. May 31st, 1990. So this is actually the day before. Not really sure why I put him out of order. Charles Edmund Karskaden, we're going to run with that, was a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker. He had been found on that's why he was found later. He had been found on June 6, 1990 in Pasco County after he was shot 9 times with a .22, and his badly decomposed body was found wrapped inside of an electrical blanket. Warnos was then seen driving his car and even pawned one of his guns. So this Karskaden murder is another important aspect to this crime spree for another reason, for several reasons. For one, you keep seeing the .22 pop up. And if you remember, when they checked the car of the guy she tried to carjack, they found a .22 under the seat. So this seems to be her weapon of choice. But also, something happens here with Karskaden that needs to be, again, that's another name. Just put in the Rolodex for right now. We're going to come back to him. July 4th, 1990, Warnos and her wife Tyra Moore were seen abandoning the car of Peter Abraham Seams, a 65-year-old retired member of the Merchant Navy. Peter left for Arkansas from Jupiter, Florida in June of 1990, and no one saw him again. Moore and Warnos were seen in Orange Springs, Florida. Jupiter, by the way, Jupiter to Orange Springs is 252 miles on the Florida Turnpike. His body was never found. July 31st, 1990. 50-year-old sausage salesman Troy Burris of Ocala, Florida, is reported missing. He's later found on August 4th off of State Road 19 in Maricopa County and had been shot twice. September 11th, 1990. Victim number 6, Charles Richard Humphreys, is found in Marion County. The 56-year-old Air Force major, former child abuse investigator, and former chief of police was shot 7 times in the head and torso, and his car was found in Suwannee County. That's the one that strikes me. This wasn't just anybody. They picked a retired Air Force major and the former chief of police. I'm willing to bet that was a struggle. At least I hope it was.
Yeah, and TJ, that was actually Suwannee County. It's just spelled weird.
Oh, so if you listen to my other show, then I just say things the way they're spelled. So
yeah, no worries. It's it's based off of the Suwannee River, so it's Suwannee County,
okay,
which is kind of up north to Florida. But it's interesting how all of our shows so far have kind of intertwined, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had Bill Guinness, who started us off, who's now connected to Eileen Warnos as 2 of the biggest female serial killers of all time, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then you have Danny Rawlings, who escaped to Florida, started doing all of his killing sprees in Florida, and now you have Eileen, who is completely tearing it up on State Road 19 right now in Florida. So it's interesting.
What was Danny already running by now?
Yes. Yeah,
so
you remember, I think it was August 1990 that
that's right.
They caught him.
So this is, wow, it's about the same time.
Yeah, and if you think about it, so they were overlapping in Ocala at the same time in July.
That's crazy. We got one more to go. November 19th, 1990, the final victim, Walter Antonio, a 62-year-old trucker, security guard, and reserve police officer, was found off of a logging road in Dixie County. He had been shot 4 times, and his car was found in Brevard County 5 days later. So here's some more things to think about. The interesting part is that these two are not being particularly careful by this point, or really at all. They're being fairly brazen. They've been seen several times now abandoning vehicles and even pawned one of the victim's guns. Again, told you to keep that in the back of your head. On July 4th of 1990, the car of Peter Seams was abandoned after they were involved in a car accident. Rhonda Bailey gave a description of the two women, starting a media campaign to find the two. So once they get in this accident, in July 4th of 90, which I believe, was that the date he was killed? Yes. Yeah. Wow. People now know who they are, but they don't know their names. They know what they look like. So the heat is on now. And they made it 7 more months-ish. Due to Warnos's criminal past, her prints were already in the system, and once they matched the prints to one of the pawn receipts and a print left on the inside of Seam's car, the hunt's on. Now they know who she is. On January 9th, 1991, Warnos was arrested for an outstanding warrant at the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County. The next day, Tyra Moore was arrested in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is the only thing I've never been really able to figure out. And I want to say this now before I drop the bombshell I'm about to in the next sentence. No one's really known how involved Tyra Moore was, other than she was there. Which, again, is weird, considering what Eileen is doing. Allegedly, when these murders happen, right? She's a sex worker. But we don't know. We never really know what involvement she has. Is she helping? Is she doing it as well? And I mean, just the murder aspect. Like, we never really find out. And there's reason for that, and we'll get into that here in just a few minutes. However, and here's the bombshell. Moore had agreed to coax a confession out of Warnos in exchange for diplomatic immunity. She was returned to Florida, put into a hotel, and instructed to call Warnos. By the way, I'm not sure diplomatic immunity was the right phrase just now. We'll just say immunity. She's not a foreign official. My fault. Over the course of several phone calls, Moore was telling Warnos to help Tyra clear her name. 3 days later, on January 16th, Eileen made a full confession after stating that they were all in self-defense as the men were trying to rape her. On January 14th, 1992, Warnos went on trial for the killing of Richard Mallory, so that was the first one. During this trial, an interesting law came into play. I had never heard of before, completely unaware of it. A lot of it's because I don't live in Florida, because it's only specific there. There's something called the Williams Rule. And I had to research this because it came up in the story, and I was incredibly curious. This rule states that evidence from collateral crimes, so meaning in using this case as an example, right? She's being tried for Richard Mallory's murder. You're not supposed to bring evidence from other crimes that you think she's committed into this hearing unless she's being she's being tried for multiple at a time, and she wasn't. It was just Richard Mallory. These collateral crime evidence, they're not admissible in court unless the prosecution uses it for motive, intent, knowledge, modus operandi, or lack of mistake, which I don't know what lack of mistake means. But modus operandi, I found that piqued my interest out of the group, because when it's a murder like this, and actually the Williams case, that this is the Williams versus the state of Florida that this is based off of, he was being tried for murder. He was actually trying to get out of the electric chair, in one of his appeals when this rule came into play. It was 1960, I think. Actually, I wrote it down. I should really read further next time I just start running my face. But modus operandi piqued me because, again, that means essentially the popular term they use on crime shows is signature. That's how they know it's them. So that one piqued my interest. This rule got its name from the case of Williams versus the state of Florida in 1959. Is when you're off.
So the absence of mistake exception, it pretty much excludes evidence of prior crimes where the defendant raises the defense of mistake for the same crime for which they are on trial, pretty much.
So what exactly does defensive mistake mean? The mistake part is throwing me off.
So in other words, like, hey, I was tried for a crime, pretty much, and they either have not convicted me yet, or they did not convict me of that crime. So you really can't hold me accountable for that yet.
Okay. So almost, to use a better term, it's almost like double jeopardy, but the first verdict hasn't happened yet for it to be double jeopardy. Got it. Okay. Very good. In this Williams versus the state of Florida case from 1959, again, we're going to go on a little history lesson here, a little education. Ralph Williams was being tried for this for some abhorrent crimes on a 17-year-old girl. Luckily survived. But when she went to park her car, Williams stabbed her in the chest with an ice pick. And just wait. It's if you're in your car and looked in the back seat and cringed, just wait, it's gonna get worse. And then made her drive around and adhere to his wishes as he sexually assaulted her twice. Although he let her live, Williams' defense was that he had consent. Huh? You stabbed her with an ice pick. I don't think anyone's going to agree to that.
Yeah, I don't really trust his judgment after the ice pick.
No. Yeah, she wanted me to do that. What? As the case proceeded, some evidence was presented that wasn't directly linked to this case and instead was used to try and paint a picture of Williams. Williams was trying to get out of the electric chair as this case was going on, thus the Williams rule, because that was actually ruled in his favor. I don't know whether or not he got taken out of the chair. That I don't know. But he won that. He won the appeal based on they weren't using the evidence from the crime to convict him. They were using the evidence from another crime to try to paint him as this monster. I mean, which he is. But again, in some cases, you see things like this pop up and you go, well, this legal mumbo jumbo, this is just red tape and everything else. It is there for a reason. In cases like this, it's unfortunate that this clown got off. Again, I don't know if he got out of the electric chair or not. I'm not sure. But, and by the way, when they ruled in his favor, he was still guilty. They just said that, yeah, you can't do that, right? But all these things are here for a reason, and there is precedent, and sometimes, again, unfortunately, in this situation, it got used to help a bad dude, but sometimes it works the opposite way, and it helps, give credence to a guy that's innocent, but that the defense, of course, or not the defense, the prosecutors are going to paint like the second coming of, Jason Voorhees, but you can't do that. You can, but you can't use evidence from other cases to do that. Back to Eileen. Due to this ruling, the prosecution was allowed to submit evidence related to other crimes outside of the Mallory murder to show a pattern of illegal activity. So again, they can't use it to paint Wuornos with a specific picture, but they can use it for motive, intent, knowledge, modus operandi, and lack of mistake. 13 days after the trial started on January 27th, Wuornos was convicted thanks in large part to the testimony from Tyra Moore. During her sentencing, psychiatrists for the defense claimed that Wuornos was mentally unstable and diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. So again, her dad had schizophrenia, and now she's got borderline personality disorder. And you're like, well, I don't want her to get off due to a psychiatric plea. Don't worry, she doesn't want that either. On March 31st, she pled no contest to the murders of Charles Humphreys, Troy Burgess, and David Spears, and even made another confession. This time, she confessed, really reaffirmed that Mallory had raped her. But this time she admitted the other ones had not, which is huge. However, she did qualify it that they had started to do so. The reason for the confession? Eileen wanted to get right with God. Those are her words, not mine. Overall, she was found guilty of 6 murders and given 6 life sentences. Now, if you remember, she committed 7. There was no 7th life sentence because the body of Peter Seams was never found. No body, no murder. Later, Bornos had stated that the reason for the murders was robbery and not wanting to leave the witnesses behind. There's your reason. That's the real reason. And what's really bizarre here as we get to the end of Eileen, her life, you can clearly see in the documentary she's losing her grip on reality. However, she becomes absurdly honest towards the end. It's bizarre. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually your bullshit becomes thicker as time goes on. She became like, as soon as she was convicted, she's like, all right, I'm dropping the charade. Let's be real. Now, again, is she mentally ill? 100%. No doubt. But she knew somewhat of what was going on, and we're about to get into that part. So, there's also something called the psychopathy checklist, which I'd never heard of. A series of tests and questions used to scale someone's mental and emotional well-being. The checklist contains 40 points worth of material. So again, this is tests, cognitive tests, visual tests, things of that nature. A score of 30 is considered psychopathic. Eileen scored a 32. She only appealed her death sentence once in 1996, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied it. In 2001, she fired her legal team and withdrew all remaining appeals because, as she says, and again, this is her words, I killed those men, robbed them cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance of keeping me alive or anything because I would kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. That's what she said. So again, when you see, because I believe the documentary was like the last 3 months of her life, a short time span, you can see, right, there is mental instability there. But she's just becomes brazenly honest, at least to a point. Because in the final weeks of her life, Eileen had agreed to be interviewed by documentarian Nick Broomfield. She had discussed getting to be taken away and meeting God and Jesus and the angels and the beyond of the beyond. And again, that's what she said. She claimed that her mind was tortured inside the prison and her head was being crushed by sonic pressure. So again, this is the tinfoil hat stuff. We're getting ready to start that. It's worth noting here that she had made several claims of mistreatment from the guards, including finding urine, saliva, and dirt in her food, mildew on her mattress, excessive strip searches, tight handcuffing, and other things because, as she says, the guards were hoping she'd commit suicide before she was executed. I didn't include this, and I'm not really sure why, but I even heard her say, I read her that she said that the security guards she could overhear the security guards talking about raping her. And do I know any of those things are true? I don't. But if one of them's true, maybe except the tight handcuffing. But the other things, yeah, I mean, these people, they're evil, but you got to remember they're still people. And I'm not saying they should have posh hotel rooms and room service, but if in fact you're shitting in her food, or not, I guess they were peeing in it, but come on, man. Even in the end, she turned on the documentarian for sabotaging her for the sake of selling books and movies. Her final words on camera in the documentary were, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." On October 9th, 2002, she was executed by lethal injection. She declined her last meal and instead drank a coffee. Her final words were, "Yes, I would just like to say that I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." She was the second woman in Florida history to be put to death and only the 10th in the United States since 1976, when the Supreme Court restored capital punishment. Former FBI profiler Robert K. Ressler mentions Warnos in his autobiographical history, documenting his 20-year career with the FBI. He states that he does not often discuss female serial killers because they tend to kill in sprees instead of in a sequential fashion. This actually has since been defeated, because that's not true. There's actually been a couple handfuls of female serial killers now, and they're very detailed oriented, probably more than men. He states Warnos is the only exception, which again we know is not true, because if you listen to episode 1, we told you that was Belle Gunness. Be that as it may, Warnos will live on through several books written about her, 2 documentaries, and the 2003 film Monster, starring Charlize Theron. If we have defeated the point that she is America's first female serial killer, she's definitely the most notorious.
Yeah, she definitely is more interesting than what I remembered from the movie. But it actually, having you talk about how she was helping with the documentary, I actually started looking it up because I was like, I thought I remembered back in the day, Charlize Theron actually got to meet her and kind of do her character work with her, but she actually never worked with her. What actually happened was Warnos actually sent some of the letters and kind of communicated with the director and through letters. And then ultimately, her best friend kind of communicated with the director and Charlize Theron to kind of capture some of the characteristics of Warnos. And then Theron actually traveled with the director, kind of some of the roadmap of Warnos's killing spree. So they really kind of captured her pretty well in that movie. But it's just fascinating to hear kind of like her life story and kind of seeing it through your research. I think that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, again, and when we do, and you should get, by the way, you guys should get used to this, because this is how, at least I'm going to do it from now. I'm going to give the whole backstory leading up and, obviously the crimes afterwards. But when I listen to 2 other true crime podcasts outside of the one we do, and what's of course the killings are interesting, but to me a lot of the times the backstory is more interesting, if there is one. Like Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't really have one. He had a decent enough, I mean, there's some stuff there. He had a decent enough upbringing. He even said it in his interviews. Bundy wasn't terribly mistreated. Gacy either. And it almost seems like, for the most part, the backstory is more entertaining, or not entertaining, interesting. But what people need to keep in mind is when we tell the backstory, their childhood, traumatic things that happened to them, we're not excusing the behavior. because, and I've heard this said by several people that do true crime podcasts now, several people in the millions have been abused as children and not killed people. Okay. But when you throw in here in Eileen's case specifically, when you throw in the just worst of the worst upbringings you could have, on top of the fact she had these social disorders, she was a ticking time bomb. And actually, I'm almost amazed, again, given the time, had she not been so reckless and brazen, she's getting more than 7. Absolutely, she's getting more than 7. But it was because she was so reckless and careless why she only, and I use that word, almost sarcastically, but it's why she only got to 7, because it could have been much worse.
Well, and even if, if you think about it, if she was back in Belle's time, right?
Oh, yeah.
How many more would she have gotten because of the DNA and everything because of the DNA, they were able to find her quicker, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
but again, the police work, again, and we didn't poke fun of it. We just said what it was back then. And we didn't even say anything about the specific police work. It's just the precincts didn't communicate. But the police work it took to match the print from Warnos's criminal record to the car to the pawn receipt that's genius level. I'm actually curious what led them to the pawn receipt, because that kind of came out of nowhere when I was researching it. And again, it's not something you'd think of, like, oh, I bet she pawned a gun recently. We should go look at receipts. We should go finger dust receipts at a pawn shop.
Well, it really comes down to critical thinking, technology,
right,
and communication. I think that's really where it comes down to. The quicker you can actually get to someone. So,
to me, and again, this is why I wish we knew more about Tyra Moore. Is when I was reading this almost sounded like the entire plot behind Natural Born Killers. This is, now granted, they weren't, creating fake scenarios to draw people in and kill them that way. But in a way they were, because Eileen was a sex worker. She knew how to draw men to wherever she wanted to go to do this. And then she would rob them and kill them because she wouldn't leave witnesses. And I don't think we should understate, because again, this rarely happens. As a matter of fact, the only person I can think of off the top of my head that completely came clean, and it took 20 years, mind you, when this person did, through all their crimes, was Berkowitz. Ted Bundy is fascinating because he would only talk about the crimes in the third person. He would only say he or this person. He never admitted to doing anything, but he said he or this person when he was reliving his crimes. Gacy did. And Gacy was oddly comfortable when he did. His is a little bit unraveling because he's just so happenstance with it. And like it's the most reasonable thing in the world. Dahmer was comfortable, but Eileen was almost immediate. Because again, she was convicted in January of 91. So she was killed she was only in prison 11 years before she was killed. And again, Berkowitz was 20. Dahmer might have been fairly quick. I think he was killed in 99. Ramirez. There's not a lot of interview tape on Ramirez. Now that I think about it. I don't know if I've ever heard an interview from Richard Ramirez. And he wasn't executed. He died from cancer. But this is what happened. I'm going to tell you what happened. And what I find interesting is, say I'm in the family of Richard Mallory, and I never wanted to believe what she said about him was true, that he attempted to rape her. But then she comes out and says these other guys didn't, he did. That's bonkers to me. And you almost have to wonder in this situation that probably was self-defense. But you have to wonder when she got, the kill of Richard Mallory under her belt. Is that what triggered it and led her down this road? So, I mean, it's 7 people in less than a year. And you can say it's a spree, because I guess technically, considering the timeline and the amount, it would be, but they're all killed the same way. Shot several times with the 22 in a car in the middle of nowhere. That's not a spree. I don't know. She's almost one we might have to come back and revisit again later. And because her story is one of the most horrifying ones I've ever read. I find the research interesting. I didn't find it enjoyable, but there is so much happening here, from the upbringing to the mental state at the end. There is so much happening in the middle.
Yeah, I think if you think back to it, so like before Mallory, right? Her big crime right before that, right, is in '86, where she gets caught pretty much carjacking someone, right? Mm-hmm. And so that one, she gets turned in because she leaves a victim, right? Someone to talk about what happened. And so I think maybe that's where, after she got attacked by Mallory and she was figured out how easy it was to kill him after self-defense, maybe that could be why, hey, no victim left behind, no witness left behind. I'm sorry.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It was just easier that way. So I definitely think this is something that we definitely want to hear from our listeners. Like, hey, yes, what more do you want to hear about Eileen? And let us see if there's enough material for a second episode.
Yeah. So we didn't really bring it up at the beginning. We should bring it up now. And I'm going to, we want to make this interactive. We want you guys to be driving the ship, so to speak. Which is why I'm doing my polls every week for the next show. But also, I'm going to make myself another drink while we're sitting here shooting the shit. Also, we want this show to be forward about what you want. So go on wherever you listen to the show too, and fill out a review, because that's a great way to talk directly to us. And also, if we get more reviews, we'll start hitting lists. More people will get to listen to it or find us, and then we can start this little true crime family. Because I love my wrestling family, but true crime is far more interesting for me to talk about than wrestling. And I love wrestling. I mean, obviously that's the case, but this stuff, because wrestling is, and again, as much of a historian as I am, as much as I love it, it doesn't require that much brain space. Whereas this stuff, when you have to be able to process the information, memorize facts and dates, and then you have to be able to decipher terminology. You have to be able to understand mental states, and things like that. There's so much more area to cover. The conversations are much more interesting. It's much more fun.
Yeah, I think we actually capture a broader audience too with the true crime. I think both of us enjoy wrestling, right? It's been part of our life for forever, but at the same point, so is true crime, right?
Right.
Everybody's experienced death, right? Not everybody enjoys wrestling.
True. So before we sign off on this episode, make sure follow the network on Twitter at FilterFreeNet, which is where you can find the video version of this show. If you want to see our beautiful faces, which I would just listen to it if I were you. That's just being honest. You can also watch our other shows we have. We have my other show, Filter Free Popcast, which we do every drops every Tuesday. We record generally on Tuesdays, but they drop the Tuesday after, so we're always a week behind on the news when we drop a new show. That's why it's that way. I can tell you that our next episode is Royal Rumble 1989, and I go off on Wrestling Journalist to start the show. So there's that. We have footballers getting paid with Tim and Dave. Although with the NFL playoffs coming to an end, I believe that show's gonna be taking a break for the summer.
And based off the score and the ranking, it should be getting paid with TJ and Justin.
It should be, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, my fantasy football team won the title this year in my league. We're the first two in our filter free pool. I mean,
Just saying.
Maybe we'll do college basketball.
Yeah. Hey, with this episode dropping possibly on Saturday, what can we expect Saturday night?
Oh, good call. So if you're listening to this when this episode drops, even if you don't like wrestling, even if you like, you're just here for the true crime part, tonight, as we're talking, January 28th, we're going to have a Royal Rumble pre-show at 6 o'clock. Is it Eastern time?
Yes.
6 o'clock Eastern time. We're doing a pre-show for the Royal Rumble. Then starting at 7, I'm not going to be there for the whole Royal Rumble watch party because I'm going to be at someone else's house. But the Rumble match, I probably will be, because we had a Royal Rumble pool that a bunch of our Patreons and other listeners have jumped in on. And the charity, which charity is all these donations going to?
All the proceeds go to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.
There you go. Obviously, if you win, you're going to get something, out of it. You're not going to be like, well, congrats, high five. But what we're going to do is, since everyone was, I don't even know my number yet. So everyone was assigned a number. So what we're going to do is, as the men's Royal Rumble match and the women's Royal match is happening live, as each contestant comes out, we will announce who has that number.
Ooh, actually, we've changed that because it's
We did.
too hard to do it like that. So basically, what we're going to do is during the pre-show, we're going to randomize all the numbers and tell everybody their spots in both Rumbles. So that way you don't have to stay on if you don't want to. You know where your spot is and kind of go from there.
I like that. That's good. There's also Wrestling Rewrite with me and Mike Kolb, where we play Total Extreme Wrestling 2020, which is a computer simulator where you get to run your own wrestling company. We just hit January 1st, 2005. We're 1 year in of our TNA game save. We had some choices that you could be as the owner of the company. You could either be Jeff Jarrett, obviously. You could be Vince Russo. You could be Dixie Carter, or the wild card we threw in was Jerry Jarrett. I picked Vince Russo, and I can tell you it's already burned me 3 times in contract negotiations. I can't imagine why that would be. So the game is fairly realistic. So there's that as well. We're not. This first season is just kind of a feeling out period. The game saves are going to get much more detailed and hard as we go on. So, but that's fun. That's usually every 2 weeks we do that. We've been slacking. We're actually now almost a month since the last time we did a show, but it's because, Mike and I are both parents with kids and jobs and wives. So some things have come up, but that we should be getting back to that here pretty soon.
So basically, just curious, season 1 doesn't come with any NDAs then, if you're playing Impact and those people aren't involved.
Interesting. We might be in trouble. I did not think of that.
Sorry.
Well, I know if we do a WWF save from like 1986, we're definitely going to have to do that. Ooh, a little topical humor there.
That, and you might have to have some steroid court cases and everything else.
I don't know if I've never played a game save from 1992, because the way it works is obviously they can't give you an actual wrestling roster because that would be copyright infringement. So what you have to download mods,
right,
to do it, and they have several years. And 92 is one of them, but 91 isn't.
I wonder why.
We might have to do that.
Yeah. Well, do you want to take us away? Tell us how you can find us on Twitter.
Well, before we one last thing before we leave, do you know who you're covering next week?
I do not.
We do. Okay.
I'd love to find out on the air. Let's hear the surprise in my voice.
Should the people decide who you're going to cover?
Oh, yes. I will put it up on the poll for this weekend, and that gives me some time to research. So
very good. I like it.
I'll put some options up and then go from there. So
with that being said, you can find us on our social media. He is at Justin Yent. I am at TStevens91, and we will see you next week here on the Evolution of Evil.
The views expressed on this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the views of our employers.
Evolution of Evil.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep. That's when they would be strangled.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
'Cause I want to know who I'm looking at.
Evil is not spurned. Evil is thought of as a spirit that needs help.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.